We just got what could be the clearest evidence yet that Donald Trump may have committed a crime in his efforts to overturn the 2020 presidential election, a question that's kind of lingered over the entire thing. And it comes from an 18-page opinion by U.S. District Court Judge David Carter, it was issued yesterday, in which he sifted through tons of evidence and emails between Trump's associates as part of that case brought by John Eastman, one of the Trump's coup plotters. Judge Carter wrote that some of the emails, quote, show the president knew the specific numbers of voter fraud were wrong, but continue to tout those numbers both in court and to the public. So what does this latest ruling mean, not just for the January 6th committee, which is now going to get that evidence, but in terms of the broader case being built by the Department of Justice? Andrew Weissman spent years working in the Department of Justice, most recently served as lead prosecutor in Robert Mueller's special counsel investigation, now a professor of practice at the New York University School of Law, and he joins me now. It's great to have you here at the table.
Nice to be here.
What do you think the implications of that Judge Carter ruling are?
I think there's several. One, it's worth noting, which I usually keep forgetting, which is there is a federal judge who has found that the former president of the United States.
What's happening, people? Welcome to Dr. John Podcast again. A seismic shift just hit Trump world as a key insider's actions have cracked the walls of loyalty that once seemed impenetrable. The ground has shifted beneath everything we thought we knew about devotion and power, threatening to bring down the structure in ways that will echo for generations. The figure at the center of this earthquake is Kash Patel, and I need you to understand right now that the story you've been hearing on social media, the breathless headlines screaming about guaranteed prison sentences and imminent collapse, those versions are missing crucial pieces that change everything about how we interpret what actually happened. We've covered Patel before on this channel, that strange, almost mythological figure who rose from relative obscurity to become one of the most recognizable faces of Trump's defense apparatus, the man who went on television night after night with that confident smile, assuring America that there was nothing to see here, that everything had been properly declassified.
Has committed a crime.
Right.
In fact, two crimes.
More likely than not, yes.
Exactly, under a preponderance standard. Right. So that is obviously a lot less than proof beyond a reasonable doubt. But
it's not a random cable news pundit.
Exactly. It is not. It is not
us. Yeah, right.
Chatting
exactly.
about our opinions.
Right.
This is somebody who has looked at the evidence, who's done an incredibly serious job.
Not just looked at the evidence, looked at evidence that no one else has gotten to look at.
Absolutely.
I mean, he's got the emails. He's sitting there going through them.
Absolutely. And by the way, he's doing what Judge Cannon could have been doing, which is he's doing what a judge does, which is he went through all the documents. He didn't need a special master. He rolled up his sleeves and did the job himself. I couldn't resist making that comparison.
In my business, we call the special master a guest host. See, that's when you're not working.
I love that.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's when you get it. Yeah.
So the other part is that because he's made this ruling that the attorney-client privilege does not apply because of crime fraud, meaning you can have an attorney-client privilege unless you're using the lawyer to commit fraud.
Right.
Whether the lawyer's involved or not, is that these documents are now further proof. They can be used in civil cases, they can be used in criminal cases, and they can be used in two types of criminal cases.
That the whole Mar-a-Lago document saga was nothing more than a witch hunt designed to destroy a presidency. But that was the public Patel, the polished performer who understood exactly what his audience wanted to hear and delivered it with practiced conviction. What we're dealing with now is something entirely different, something that emerged from a grand jury room where television cameras don't reach and where the penalties for dishonesty are measured in years behind bars rather than ratings points. I was careful in our previous discussion about Patel to emphasize the distinction between what's documented and what's merely speculated, because this channel has always operated on the principle that truth matters more than drama, that accuracy outlasts outrage, and that if we're going to understand the most consequential political story of our era, we need to separate the verified from the sensational. That commitment to truth is more important now than ever, because what's actually happened with Patel is in many ways more significant than the viral versions would have you believe, and it carries implications that stretch far beyond the immediate headlines.
Federal ones and in Georgia.
Right.
Which is so because what he's talking about is specific things that were said by Donald Trump that he was told that he shouldn't say. So the third
that were
piece,
false.
Exactly. And the third piece is that in a criminal trial, what you are really trying to do is figure out what did the defendant know? What did the defendant do? So here you have the judge specifically focusing on what did Donald Trump sign and what was he told beforehand, which was not just advice of counsel. This was advice of counsel not to do it, saying that these are things that we cannot verify. If you go forward with this, we cannot say that this is true.
And there's an interesting connection between that behavior as evidenced in Judge Carter's ruling here, which, again, we're coming from him. This is not just some rando, right? And what appears to have been the case in the Mar-a-Lago document situation, in which we have multiple reports that suggest that the lawyers around him told him, stop doing this, don't do it. You have lawyers saying, I won't attest.
The update that changes everything is this. Kash Patel already testified under a grant of immunity about Donald Trump's handling of classified documents. And that testimony is now a permanent, locked-in piece of the evidentiary record that sits with prosecutors, with Congress, and buried inside a special counsel report that a Trump-appointed judge has sealed from public view. Let that sink in for a moment, because the implications are genuinely staggering. The man who stood beside Trump through every controversy, who defended every decision, who became the public face of the declassification defense, this same man was compelled under oath to tell a story that reportedly contradicts everything he'd been saying on television. He didn't flip in the dramatic sense you see in movies. He didn't walk into a prosecutor's office with a deal already cut and a rehearsed statement ready to deliver.
Under penalty of breaching the government, because I don't trust you, Donald Trump, and he appears to have run every stop sign they put up in front of him.
Remember, you're talking to somebody. I dealt with the special counsel investigation where Don McGahn is sort of an exhibit A to a lawyer who said, you know what, I didn't sign up for this. And I'm not going to go to jail for you, and I am not going to lie. And what you're seeing, for instance, with Alex Cannon, who I refer to as the good Cannon, not the Judge Cannon, is that he is sort of the new Don McGahn, saying that I'm not going to go forward with this. And that obviously is a huge witness. We don't know the details of it, but you can be sure that the department does.
In terms of that case, new word today, CNN reporting that Kash Patel, of course, who is sort of a, kind of like a right-wing functionary kind of guy. He was like an errand dude for Devin Nunes and then was over doing Lord knows what in the last days of the administration. That Patel spent several hours throughout the morning of October 13th before a grand jury at the U.S. courthouse in Washington, D.C. It's not clear if Patel answered the grand jury's questions or declined to respond, citing his Fifth Amendment protections in his rights.
What happened was quieter, more procedural, and in some ways more devastating for the man who appointed him to the highest law enforcement position in the country. The arc of this story is genuinely remarkable, and every step of it is documented in court records and legal filings that paint a picture of a loyalist caught between his public performance and his legal obligations. Back in 2022, when the Mar-a-Lago investigation was heating up, Kash Patel was called before a Washington, D.C. grand jury that was examining Trump's handling of classified materials. The prosecutors had questions about what Patel knew, about what he'd seen, about the so-called standing declassification order that Trump's defenders had been citing as the legal justification for keeping sensitive documents at a private club.
Now, what's interesting here is this is the Mar-a-Lago document grand jury. What does it mean, you think, that Patel is being called before them?
So, to me, there's no reason to be putting Kash Patel in the grand jury, whether he ended up testifying or, as I think is his right, he could take the fifth.
Yeah.
But the fact that he's being put in, to me, signals that the prosecutors definitely have Donald Trump as a target, and that is where they're going.
Why?
Because there's no real reason otherwise to put him in. It's not like they're doing a case on Kash Patel. He's so likely to take the fifth himself.
Right.
And remember, there's evidence about what he said. We know from the redacted search warrant that Kash Patel was the person who, in May and June, had made statements saying that Donald Trump had done this sort of spontaneous, miraculous declassification of documents when things were moved from the Oval Office to the residence. They spontaneously just became
the immaculate declassification.
Exactly. So you can be sure they're going to ask about that, which is, we want to know, is that a possible defense? We want to make sure we've heard it.
I see.
And Patel's first move, the very first thing he did when faced with the prospect of testifying under oath, was to invoke his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. Think about how extraordinary that choice really is, because this is the man who had been everywhere on television, who had confidently and repeatedly stated that Trump had declassified everything before leaving office, that it was all authorized, that there was nothing improper about any of it. But when he was put under oath before a grand jury, when the consequences of dishonesty became real and immediate, when his words would be recorded and could be used against him, he suddenly had nothing to say. You don't take the Fifth Amendment about a story you're confident is innocent and true.
The other
right, because
thing,
that's a plausible. I mean, it's a ludicrous defense, but it's a plausible defense, right? Or at least a possible defense.
It's a possible argument. I don't know that it's technically a legal defense, but you certainly, if you're a prosecutor, you want to anticipate that and you want to know everything there is. In fact, if it's true, you want to factor that in terms of, at the very least, should you charge a case?
That's a good point.
The other point is that Kash Patel also in May and June talked about that he had access to the classified documents and he talked about releasing them.
Yes.
That also is kind of, if I were at the department, I'd be all over that to know, tell me more about that, because one of the things that you're interested in is not just that you found the documents, but what happened to them. What happened to the information in them? What happened to the documents? Were they copied? Are they in the hands of somebody who should not have them?
And we still think there may be some outstanding. There are concerns that there are some outstanding, they seem reasonable concerns, given the fact you got a bunch of empty folders hanging around. Andrew Weissman.
You don't hide behind constitutional protections when you're eager to tell the world how righteous your actions were. Taking the Fifth is what you do when telling the truth under oath might expose you to criminal liability. It's the choice you make when the TV defense and the legal reality are two entirely different things. That single choice told prosecutors everything they needed to know about how solid the declassification defense really was, because if it had been as airtight as Patel had been claiming, he would have welcomed the opportunity to repeat it under oath and help his former boss. Instead, he clammed up and forced the Justice Department to take extraordinary measures to get him to talk. So the Justice Department went to a federal judge named Beryl Howell, and she made a ruling that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of this entire saga. Judge Howell determined that the Department of Justice could compel Patel to testify, but only if they granted him immunity from prosecution based on whatever he said. This is where the legal mechanics get truly fascinating, and understanding them is essential to grasping why this testimony matters so much. Prosecutors offered what's called use immunity. And let me make this crystal clear, because it's the crucial mechanism that changed everything. Use immunity means Patel's own answers cannot be used to charge him with crimes, but they absolutely can be used against other people, against, for instance, Donald Trump himself. It's a trade that transforms a reluctant witness into a potential weapon against a larger target, and it's been used throughout American legal history to crack open organized crime families, corporate fraud conspiracies, and political corruption scandals exactly like this one. Patel's own spokesperson confirmed that his testimony was compelled over his objection by that grant of immunity. He didn't volunteer, he didn't cooperate willingly, he fought the process, lost in court, and was forced to answer questions under oath with his own criminal exposure removed so that his testimony could be aimed squarely at others. The dynamic here is everything, because Patel was one of the most vocal public defenders of Trump's declassification story. He was out there selling the narrative that Trump had the authority to declassify anything he wanted, that there was a standing order, that it was all perfectly legal and above board. But under immunity, per the legal breakdowns we've seen, Patel was forced to describe what actually happened with the document handling, the subpoena responses, the truth about that supposed standing declassification order, and the reporting indicates his sworn account directly contradicts the public claims he'd been making for years. Read that again because it's genuinely stunning. The man who defended Trump on television was compelled under oath to give an account that undercuts the very defense he'd been selling to the American public. The shield became the sword, the loyalist became the witness, not by choice but by court order. Now, before the thumbnail artists and the comment sections run wild with this, before the screaming headlines declare that this guarantees Trump is going to spend the rest of his life in prison, I have to give you the honest other half because it's essential to understanding the full picture. There is no trial happening right now. There is no life sentence anywhere on the table. Trump's original Mar-a-Lago criminal case was thrown out when Judge Aileen Cannon ruled that Jack Smith's appointment as special counsel was unconstitutional. And Smith later moved to dismiss the remaining pieces after Trump won re-election because long-standing Department of Justice policy bars prosecuting a sitting president. So anyone telling you that Patel's testimony guarantees prison is selling you certainty that doesn't exist in our legal system. The legal machinery has not delivered any such verdict, and it's crucial to acknowledge that reality if we're going to honestly assess what this all means. What's true is narrower and honestly more interesting than the sensational versions. A sworn insider account of Trump's document handling now exists permanently, held by the people who matter, even as the case that would have used it sits dismissed and the report containing it sits buried beneath layers of judicial protection. Let's walk through what's real versus what's hype, because the gap between the viral version and the documented version is where all the meaning actually lives. Start with that Fifth Amendment invocation, because people consistently underestimate how much it reveals about the underlying truth of the situation. When Patel first appeared before that grand jury and took the Fifth, he was making a legal calculation with enormous implications for everyone involved. The Fifth Amendment protects against compelled self-incrimination. It exists to ensure the state can't force you to be the instrument of your own prosecution. Invoking it is absolutely a right, not an admission of guilt, and that distinction matters and deserves to be honored. But strategically, it's a loud signal that something is very wrong with the public story. Patel had been publicly, confidently asserting the declassification story on television for months. If that story were straightforwardly true and involved no legal jeopardy for him personally, testifying to it under oath would be the easiest thing in the world. You just repeat the true thing and move on with your life. Instead, he refused to answer, citing self-incrimination. The most reasonable interpretation, and certainly the one prosecutors drew, is that testifying truthfully under oath about the document handling carried real legal risk for Patel personally. That's the gap between what you'll say on Fox News and what you'll say under penalty of perjury. Fox has no perjury penalty. No one goes to jail for misleading a television audience. The grand jury, however, has real consequences for dishonesty, and Patel knew that perfectly well. Now, the immunity mechanism deserves deeper examination because understanding it is understanding the whole story. Judge Howell ruled that the Department of Justice could compel Patel only by immunizing him. There are different types of immunity in American law, and the type used here, use immunity, is the sharpest tool prosecutors have for exactly this kind of situation. It works like a trade. The witness gives up his Fifth Amendment protection, and in exchange, the government promises his compelled words won't be used to prosecute him personally. But those same words remain fully usable against everyone else, including Donald Trump. So the immunity that protected Patel personally is precisely what converted him into a weapon against Trump. Prosecutors don't hand out use immunity to friendly witnesses telling exculpatory stories. They deploy it to crack open reluctant insiders whose truthful testimony they need against a bigger target. The grant itself tells you Patel was the reluctant insider and Trump was the bigger target. His spokesperson's own words, compelled over his objection, confirmed the dynamic perfectly. This wasn't cooperation, it was extraction. And what got extracted is the heart of this entire matter. Patel had been selling the standing declassification order, the theory that Trump had a blanket automatic order declassifying anything he took to Mar-a-Lago. But under immunity, per the legal breakdowns, Patel was forced to describe the actual reality of document handling, subpoena responses, and that supposed order. And his sworn account reportedly contradicts the public version he'd been broadcasting. Think about what that means evidentiarily. Prosecutors now hold two Patels in their records. The TV Patel who defended Trump with such confidence, and the grand jury Patel who under oath and immunity told a different story entirely. The contradiction between them is itself powerful evidence of the defense's weakness and potentially of Trump's intent and knowledge. A former Shield sworn into a prosecution asset, that's the phrase that matters most in this whole saga. Now we have to address Jack Smith's buried report, because this is where the story turns genuinely strange and where the legal machinations become almost surreal in their complexity. Smith completed a detailed report on Trump's handling of classified documents, but his second volume, the one containing extensive grand jury material and classified evidence discussion, the volume that would presumably include or reflect what Patel and others told the grand jury, has been permanently blocked from publication by Judge Cannon in Florida. Cannon's reasoning was that releasing it would inflict irreparable harm on Trump and others, and she stressed that the case was dismissed after Trump's re-election and that all defendants remain presumed innocent. So we have this remarkable situation where a special counsel assembled a detailed evidentiary account of Trump's document conduct, built partly on compelled insider testimony, and a Trump-appointed judge has sealed the most substantive volume of it from the public, while prosecutors and Smith's team know exactly what it says. Sit with the layered irony of that for a moment. The declassification shield was defended publicly by Patel. Patel was then compelled to contradict it privately under oath. That contradiction went into a report, and the report was then buried by a judge on the grounds that revealing it would harm Trump. Each layer seals the last. The public sees the TV defense, the record holds the sworn contradiction, and the seal keeps the two from ever meeting in daylight. It's an almost perfect machine for keeping a hidden account hidden, and it's exactly the kind of buried record dynamic that fuels endless speculation because everyone knows the account exists and almost no one can read it. But now the essential honesty, the part the viral versions bulldoze over completely. Does any of this put Trump in prison? No. Not currently, not on the table, not close. Walk the actual legal status carefully. The original Mar-a-Lago criminal case was dismissed. Cannon ruled Smith's appointment unconstitutional, a ruling that itself was contested and appealed, but it killed the case at the trial level. Then Trump won re-election, and Smith moved to dismiss the remaining federal matters because long-standing DOJ policy bars prosecuting a sitting president. So there is no active prosecution, no trial, no sentencing, no life sentence anywhere in this picture. The commentary videos screaming that Patel's testimony guarantees life in prison are taking three real things: the immunity deal, the contradicted declassification story, the buried report, and inflating them into a punishment certainty that does not exist. The pieces are real, the conclusion is fiction, and you deserve to know which is which. Let me break down what this really means for the future, because the implications stretch far beyond the immediate headlines. First, lock the honest frame hard, because it's the whole value of covering this instead of just shouting about it. Nothing here guarantees anyone prison. There is no active case, no trial, no sentence. What's real is that Patel took the fifth, was compelled under use immunity, gave sworn testimony that reportedly contradicts the declassification defense he sold publicly. And that testimony lives in a Jack Smith report whose key volume Cannon has sealed. Every one of those facts is documented. The life in prison conclusion is not a fact. It's a thumbnail designed to generate clicks. Hold the line because the documented version is strong enough and the inflated version just hands Trump's side the fake news deflection they've been waiting for. Second, the fifth to immunity arc is the single most revealing sequence about the declassification defense, and it deserves to be understood for what it structurally shows. A defense that its own most prominent public champion won't repeat under oath without immunity is a defense in serious trouble. Patel could say declassified whole sets of materials on television all day because television has no perjury statute. The moment the same claim had to be made under penalty of perjury before a grand jury, he took the fifth and then had to be compelled. The venue changed the testimony, confident on TV, silent under oath, that gap is the tell, and it's the kind of tell prosecutors build cases around even when, as here, the case never reaches trial. The detail that converts loyalty into liability exactly as we mapped in our previous discussion. Patel's total proximity to Trump made him the perfect defender and the highest value witness simultaneously. This is that paradox resolved not by a dramatic flip, but by a court order. The immunity grant is the mechanism that made his knowledge usable against Trump while protecting him personally. It's the legal system's tool for exactly the loyalist problem. You can't be prosecuted, so you can't refuse, so you must tell the truth. And the truth serves the case against your principle. Patel didn't betray Trump. The structure extracted the betrayal from him over his objection and immunized him for it. That's arguably worse for Trump than a voluntary flip because it can't be dismissed as a disgruntled rat cutting a deal. It was compelled, neutral, court-ordered truth. The buried report is the sleeper, and it matters even sealed. Cannon's injunction keeps the second volume from the public, but read what that does and doesn't accomplish. It does protect Trump from the political damage of public release. No headlines quoting the sworn contradictions, no clips, no mass audience reckoning. It does not erase the account. Prosecutors have it, Smith's team has it, Congress has alluded to it and confronted Patel with excerpts in hearings. The record is permanent. Only the publicity is blocked, which means the material sits there as sworn insider baseline of Trump's document conduct, available to any future prosecutor once the DOJ policy against charging a sitting president no longer applies, once immunity questions are litigated, once the political weather changes. Sealed is not destroyed. The report is a document with a very long fuse. Patel's current role as FBI director sharpens the irony to an almost unbearable point, and it's worth naming plainly. The man who was compelled to give testimony contradicting Trump's defense is now the FBI director. He runs the bureau, and in combative oversight hearings on the Epstein files, on internal purges, on politically sensitive investigations, Democrats accuse him of running cover for Trump. Lawmakers have confronted him with excerpts alluding to his closed-door immunity testimony. Picture the full absurdity. The FBI director sitting in a hearing being confronted with his own compelled grand jury testimony about the president who appointed him to run the FBI. The witness became the top cop. The extracted account sits under seal, while its author runs the agency that investigates exactly this kind of thing. If you tried to design a cleaner illustration of the loyalty machine's contradictions, you couldn't. This to the accountability architecture this whole series has documented because it's the same seam every time. The immunity ruling shields Trump's official acts, DOJ policy shields the sitting president, the dismissed case is closed, the active exposure paused. But this document's matter always lived at the private, unofficial seam. Storage at a club, subpoena responses, obstruction questions, the zone the immunity shield doesn't fully cover. Insider testimony is the classic key to that scene. Patel's compelled account is precisely the kind of evidence that survives the shields, because it speaks to intent and knowledge, and it's already locked in. The shields pause the exposure, they don't dissolve the evidence. That distinction, paused versus dissolved, is the difference between a threat that's gone and a threat that's merely sleeping. And somewhere in the sealed volume in Florida, in the words of the man who now runs the FBI, there's an account of what really happened with those documents that the whole system knows and the public can't see. The case is dismissed, the report is buried, the testimony is forever.